Belinda. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Sean. How are you?
My understanding is Gary's coming tomorrow. Is that correct? Am I?
It is, but he just
I,
loves
That's what
to.
you said.
I have a
Okay.
I have a
Okay.
day job to do, mate.
I got you. So someone's got to work, actually. Well,
No,
this is
sorry, I come up as Gary Fettke.
I do these every single morning at 9 a.m. my time, so it's 2 p.m. So we might have a little bit of different crew. I see mostly the same names so far, so I'm expecting maybe some different folks. We have just for you guys that are participants, and Belinda, if you're welcome to as well. We got Paul Mason coming on in an hour. So I happen to have
Okay.
Australia like the next 2 days. So I haven't seen you guys in a good 6-8 months since I saw you guys in San Diego. Hope you're doing well.
It's been a while.
I'll come there. I'm in the focus.
You're what? You're in the focus?
Now, I'm going to have to go and do my day job.
Yeah, because you're really bringing down the overall beauty of of this thing here, Gary. I mean, just let
That's right. Go tomorrow.
The way I looked at it is I sent back in my email, if you wanted me to do this at 2 a.m. in the morning, my hair doesn't look particularly good.
Yeah, no kidding. No, that doesn't make sense.
But then I think you get around that by wearing that cap.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I can just do that. Just wear a cap. I can be just really 2 a.m. in the morning. Yeah, works out well.
I'm going to give you a little heads up tomorrow. Do you want to talk about arthritis and coronavirus?
Yeah, let's talk about that. That sounds good. I'm going to mute everybody real quick, guys. It's because I'm getting a lot of wind noise, and so hang on just a second, Gary. I'm gonna mute, and then I'm going to unmute you guys. Did I do that right? Yeah, I did. Okay. Yeah, somehow I've got one other person that needs to be muted. Yeah, we can talk about arthritis for sure. I mean, obviously, you and I, between the two of us, we might know a little bit about arthritis, and then the coronavirus is. I think wants to talk about that regardless.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff.
Did I mute you? Hang on. Hang on, Gary, I just muted you.
But,
Yeah, well, let's chat about it tomorrow because I don't think arthritis or the coronavirus will be going away between tomorrow and tomorrow.
no, and if we're being live streamed at the moment, I'm going to give my wife a kiss goodbye.
That's great. Yeah, we're being live streamed, and then you're going to be recorded as well. So it's on YouTube, so it's for all posterity.
And again,
Look at you guys.
bye.
All right. So now that we got rid of that annoying guy,
Finally.
we can get to business. Now, welcome, Belinda. No, it's great having you. So, you guys don't know, Belinda and Gary are obviously a hot item. They're a couple, and Belinda, I know, has done a lot of research into the origins of nutrition science, and some of this stuff is pretty shocking. I don't know if you guys have followed her work, and I don't know what we want to end up talking about, but that's kind of been some of her expertise. Obviously, she's a proponent of lower carb diets, low carb healthy fat. I think she's a fan of meat as well. But for you guys to know, Gary went through a big deal with the Australian medical authorities where they told his basically hospital system said you're not allowed to tell people not to eat a bunch of sugar, and for some crazy reason the dietitians reported him for telling patients who were getting their feet amputated that you should cut back on sugar, which sounds just crazy to be able to think that that happened, but it did. And he went through a long, lengthy battle with the administrative systems and the legal system and the licensing boards, and that was resolved in his favor, which is good for him. But anyway, Belinda, can you add anything more to that, just by way of introduction? And then we've got like just under an hour to ask and answer questions.
Okay. I was a nurse in my past life, so I do understand a bit of this medical concept and nutrition and how it's improving health outcomes. But I've been a professional photographer for nearly 20 years. And so I was watching on the sideline. And as you say, I came about this from a rather unusual position to even go delve into all this research. And the beginning I started was with Gary. He got cancer in the year 2000, a very aggressive pituitary tumor. And he was a very, very sick man. He had a open craniotomy in 2000. He was had radiotherapy. He was on chemo for about 11 and a half years. He had second surgery in 2004. And in 2009, they said, I don't know that there's much more we can do for you. He'd been doing a lot of research, as you would imagine, as a doctor, looking into different ways that the cancer could be treated. He was getting very desperate by 2010, 2011, and he stumbled across a book called Sweet Poison, and also pharmacists suggested that he look into a drug called metformin, which, when he thought, well, why take another drug? Why don't I look to see what this actually does? Because people who were taking metformin, which is actually a drug for type 2 diabetes, they were getting improved cancer remission rates compared to the control group. And they're going, well, this is a bit unusual. And then they also saw that people were getting less incidence of cancer. So Gary thought, well, what does metformin do that could potentially help me? And it stops the uptake of sugar. It puts it into the tissues instead of into the blood glucose. So he went, well, maybe if I stop taking sugar, this might help. So that's where our stories come from, is Gary improving his own health. He put his cancer into remission a very long time ago, and he's been off all chemotherapy for 6 years, which he could never do when he was eating a high carb, sugary, dietitian approved diet. And then when he got into trouble with the medical board, as you mentioned, Sean, I just thought, how can a man be getting into trouble for improving health outcomes? He had a tsunami of diabetes complications. Maybe 20 years ago, he was seeing 1 or 2 people every year that required amputations of bits of their toes or feet or even a lower leg. And I think in 2016, he was seeing somebody every single week in northern Tasmania, which is horrific in a small place. We live in the bottom of Australia, 120,000 catchment area. And so these numbers were really scaring him. And he was finding, after he'd improved his own health with reducing sugar and processed carbs, eating more meat, eating healthy proteins that your body needs to heal, that his patients were improving as well. And we had no idea why a dietitian at his hospital reported him in 2014 for recommending a low sugar diet for his patients in hospital whose blood glucose was out of control. And they were having to use more staff to monitor them. They're having to test their blood glucose regularly, use more insulin. And Gary's going, this makes no sense. Why can't they have a low sugar diet? So where it went to from then, the medical board actually decided to investigate this, and they spent 2.5 years investigating Gary for recommending nutritional advice. And so I just went in to see who the expert witness was that they had gotten to determine if an orthopedic surgeon could recommend reducing sugar. And this expert witness worked for a cereal industry in Australia. And so that was the start of my who's writing the guidelines, who's creating the rule books, and who's protecting them.
I'm just going to say something here. What I did, because we've got 21, so I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves to ask their own questions today, just because I think it's more manageable. So don't unmute yourself unless you have a question. One of the things that we see clearly, there's conflicts of interest in nutrition and science and medicine. I mean, obviously, people have to make a buck, save a buck. That's not a surprise. There is some religious aspect that you pointed out with the creation, going back, 150 plus years now with sort of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and then the people up in Battle Creek, Michigan, and then later Sanitarium, which is, now that Australian company, which has a lot of power influence over nutrition. Can you just give us like a brief, maybe 5 minutes overview of that whole situation and how we've come to where we are today and what influence is still being wielded? And then maybe we can get into questions. Did you hear me on that one? Oh, wait, I think I've got you muted again. Sorry, I'm going to unmute you.
So understanding that this expert witness worked for Sanitarium, I was thinking, well, that's really strange. Why is the cereal industry so interested in shutting down? Well, sort of makes sense, low carb, cereal sales are down. So just quickly, it was uncovering some documents that the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturing Forum actually had a minuted meetings that I uncovered online, and I'm not a hacker, so these were just online that I was able to retrieve. And they showed that the cereal industry had an actual paid corporate partnership with the Dietitians Association of Australia for $23,000 to protect, influence, and actively defend cereal, grains, and sugars messaging. So part of this Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturing Forum, again, Sanitarium was key in this, which is, as you said, in Australia, wholly owned by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And as such, they pay no tax. They pay no tax on 420 plus processed food things that they make, mostly cereals, soy, almond milks. They make fake food. They make the meat analog, nut meat analogs, and soy meat analogs. So we've got an industry here with a vested interest, and I was thinking, okay, it's just cereals. I had no idea, starting to look into the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that they have an anti-meat, anti-saturated fat belief. And so I was thinking, well, that's adding to the conflict of interest. Not only do they have a commercial arm that's producing food, but they have a belief in the biblical Garden of Eden diet, and that's fruits, nuts, and seeds. And that's where their ideology is stemmed from. The actual Seventh-day Adventist Church was founded in 1844. It sort of started to become part of the church in 1844, coming away from the Millerite movement that people may or may not have heard of, which was about temperance, health reform. It was about the second coming. They believed Jesus was coming back in 1844 in America, and it extended, became quite a big movement, and it was very much an end of the world movement. Some people gave up their work, sold their houses, did everything else because they truly believed Jesus was coming back in October 1844. And when it didn't happen, there's a group of people that were so disappointed, and they started to create concepts. Ellen G. White, who was founder of the church, said that she had a vision from God to say it wasn't the second coming on earth. It was moving from the holy place to the most holy place in heaven, and working on their final, the final works were being done. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church was God's remnant church to the end times. So they have this belief that they are the commandment-keeping people, and one of the commandments is Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath on a Saturday instead of a Sunday, as a lot of churches would spend their time believing that Sunday was the important day. So they're looking at the Saturday Sabbath, but they also were told in 1863, which is pretty much the official formation of the church, that Jesus told, or God told Ellen G. White, and Jesus told her that Garden of Eden diet was to become their health reform message, and this message was to go into the doctrines of the church. So other churches might have health messages and might talk about health, but the Seventh-day Adventist Church actually have it in their health doctrine, and part of that is medical evangelism is the right arm of the church, and that health reform message is to be used as the entering wedge. Now, in Australia, we have a very small footprint of Seventh-day Adventism here, but in America, it's very large. And I think in Florida alone, you've got 26 Adventist health hospitals. So Ellen G. White they mentored John Harvey Kellogg. As a 12-year-old, he was working for the church. He wrote or typeset Ellen G. White's books, their tracts, their literacy evangelism, but especially a book called A Solemn Appeal to Mothers that I think would have had a profound impact on a 12-year-old, understanding that meat was a vice and more heinous, a heinous sin, and more toxic than alcohol or tobacco. And this child was typesetting a book that was telling all of the things that would happen if you ate meat, and it would cause masturbation. And, you know, we've heard masturbation cause blindness. It's come all the way through to today. Sometimes you hear that. But looking at masturbation as inwardly decaying a head, and it was if you put a pistol to your heart and shot yourself and killed yourself. So he then went on to, they mentored him to study medicine, and he became the superintendent of the Western Health Reform Institute, which was a hospital that the Adventists started in 1876 for about 20, 24 people. And John Harvey Kellogg took over as superintendent, and he grew that to 1,200 people in that hospice. As it went on, he invented cornflakes to stop people eating meat as an alternative to breakfasts, heavy breakfasts with meats. And so that was to stop people masturbating. The whole Battle Creek Sanitarium was set up in that way, but the church didn't own Kellogg's. So John Harvey Kellogg and his brother owned the business, and the tithe would have been paid to the church. Ellen saw this whole setup, and so she came to Australia for 10 years, and she set up not only the church, the printing presses, the hospital, the school, a college, which is a very small university here. We only have one, but she set up Sanitarium as wholly owned by the church, and then understanding what Sanitarium involves. It's not just a food industry. It runs a health and wellness program that was actually founded at Loma Linda University, or founded by Hans Steele, who ran it out of Loma Linda University for a long time. Sanitarium bought it in 2014, and it provides a health and wellness program around the world. It ran through Cummins Diesel, and they've got, I think, 46,000 employees, and it is teaching people to get rid of animal fats and proteins in their diet. So this is a much bigger than just we sell food, but we sell food information. We sell health, and understanding how integral Sanitarium health and well-being have become in Australian psyche. They were providing resources for our general practitioners. They just had to push a button on their best practice software, and out would come beautifully printed resources, all with Sanitarium health and wellness down the side, and telling people how to eat for diabetes, heart conditions, all sorts of other things. And it was coming from the cereal industry, and we've been so brainwashed to not even understand that's how integral they've become into our society.
But
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Dr. Baker, you're muted.
Sorry. Ray, sorry, if you guys want to ask a question, just please go ahead. I'm sure Belinda will be happy to answer questions. So we've got the chat. I can read from the chat. Oh yeah, I guess I can read from the chat here if you guys want to do that. So yeah, this is kind of this is a question that, do you yourself, Gary, anybody that you know is doing kind of similar work and speaking out against, are you getting any kind of pushback, threats, any kind of undermining of your work? Have you noticed anything out in a tangible way?
I think it was really interesting because I didn't talk about my research for the first couple of years. So Gary was being investigated 2014 to 2016. They finally came out with their determination. And I was writing to the medical board and telling them of what I was finding, but they dismissed everything. And Gary was silenced for 2.5 years. So then it took another 2.5 years through the courts, not through the ombudsman. We didn't actually have an opportunity to go to the court, not like Tim. It was all done behind closed doors. But so I didn't talk about it because I just thought it threatened me as growing up as a Christian to challenge a church ideology and think, well, how could these people be thinking this? But could they really be creating harm? I think a lot of people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church truly believe they're doing good. So it's a really difficult place to go into. And it wasn't until Gary was silenced by the medical board that Gary said, we have to talk about this because it is affecting our dietary guidelines. It's affecting, censorship of what can be said and what can't be said. And looking now into the Dietary Guideline Committee in 2020 in the US, there's a very devout Seventh-day Adventist on that committee, and he's written the global influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on diet. So this is massive. And Gary said to me, people are being told that a plant-based diet is the best thing for health. We're being taught to fear animal proteins and fats. He said, you can't not talk about this. We have to start to bring it out. And I think because I came out with a website saying I support Gary, I was trying to do the finger to the AHPRA medical board here going, you're just ridiculous. No, this is what I'm uncovering. If you're not going to talk about it, well, I am. I think because it came from a place of a passionate woman wanting to defend her husband, I don't think they thought I had a lot of readership, a lot of anywhere for it to go. So I think they just ignored a lot of it at the beginning. And then I think because I've been able to tie it up, and everything I'm talking about is online. They're proud of their history. So it's all there. I'm not talking about anything that isn't online that anyone could not find themselves either. So admittedly, some of my references have come off since I've started talking about it. But everything was there. So they couldn't really challenge anything that I've said. It's just the truth.
Do you see, I think what happens, in a sort of an interesting, sort of a subtle way is we see this SEO optimization. We see our messages being, just kind of guys like Malcolm Kendrick and some of the other ones are just kind of erased from Wikipedia and, Tom Knopf, and they're just entries just disappear. And so rather than, just dealing with it head on, they just kind of, control who gets to see you, I think.
Yeah, I think that when I first started speaking, when I took over Gary's Facebook page, I think when I announced that the medical board had silenced him or were going to investigate him, I had 1 million views on Facebook. Gary only had 5,000 people following him. So that's pretty amazing that it just went. How can a doctor not allowed to be talking about sugar? And then I agree, the SEO, I would get 150,000 people easily seeing my Facebook posts a year ago, and that has definitely been censored. But as in talking, as in I've not had anyone in particular threaten me. I was concerned about it. I can assure you, I thought this is a pretty big thing to be going into. But as I've come to understand, and why I want to keep going down this pathway, is because it's not just the Seventh-day Adventist Church and their corporate arm that's creating guidelines, but they've partnered with Coca-Cola. They've partnered with other groups that are very influential, and they seem to have this very unusual symbiotic relationship. I can't understand it because the Seventh-day Adventist Church is supposedly anti substances like caffeine and sugar, supposedly against those things, and yet they've got this partnership to create medical education. I don't know, I think I talked to you about it last time, Sean. They're creating this lifestyle medicine movement. Brilliant branding. Wish we'd thought of it sooner. Lifestyle medicine is actually the combination of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It was started at Loma Linda as the Christian Association of Lifestyle Medicine in 2003. And they've partnered with Coca-Cola to become this very, very big movement, not just in educating health professionals worldwide, running educationals, running exams. You can become board certified, you can become, all these things. All of those exams, all of the textbooks, everything they're promoting has been written by either Seventh-day Adventists or by people who are very tied to Coca-Cola. And they're now creating a medical education that's running through America, and they're trying to get it into Australia. So I've had to be really loud because I'm passionate about people knowing where this is coming from. I think it's about transparency for people who are wanting to know about their health, but certainly about wanting to teach it. And if they're becoming board certified in lifestyle medicine and don't know where the origins are from and don't know why they're doing this big anti-meat push in lifestyle medicine, well, this is where it's coming from.
Yeah, I think, go ahead. Who was that, Nancy or no? Who was it?
Michelle.
Michelle, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Hi. I'm a big fan of yours, by the way. Way to go.
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle.
Yeah. So I'm getting very specific, but I'm just wondering if you have any kind of knowledge about two different subjects. First of all, about the influence of, I guess basically I'm wondering, how did we start weaning our babies onto rice cereal? And then, you know, how did we start promoting formula for babies over breastfeeding? And then the other direction is my mom was a type 1 diabetic. So growing up, I was really aware of the American Diabetes Association. And at every turn, they would discourage us from having animal foods and fat. And so having her eat all kinds of foods that were making her blood sugar just constantly, but again, cereals and grains, Special K with skim milk. So do you have any insight into either one of those, you know, like how did we get those recommendations? Are these connected?
I think they're connected. If you look back, the American Dietetics Association was founded by Lena Francis Cooper, who was a protege of John Harvey Kellogg. She worked at Battle Creek Sanitarium. Her brothers were devout Adventists. I believe she was an Adventist, but she was certainly very involved in that whole movement and promoted an anti-meat, anti-saturated fat message. She wrote textbooks for dietetics. She wrote textbooks for nurses. Kate Lindsay, who was also working at Battle Creek, she wrote textbooks for 30 years. John Harvey Kellogg was writing textbooks. They were all very anti-saturated fat, anti-meat, pro-cereal, pro-soy, pro all those things. So considering that they were influencing very early on, Mervyn Harding was influencing when he started doing his Adventist health studies in 1948. He started them with Fred Stair at the Harvard School of Public Health. So looking at all of those things, I think there's a huge component of Adventists definitely influencing guidelines. And you read the vegetarian, I think there's a vegetarian resource group on the DAA now, and they do a big thing to Lena Cooper about how wonderful she was and how much she influenced. So she was anti-saturated fat and meat. The head of the American Dietetics Association in the 1980s was a lady called Kathleen Zolber, and she was a devout Adventist and determined to get vegetarian, vegan position papers into that, and also continuing education around those subjects, and would have definitely started to create more of an awareness of less meat, which coincided with the McGovern report in 1977. So there's lots of things that were happening. I think if you look specifically, there was a man called Harry Miller. He was an incredible missionary, medical evangelist going into China. He was a devout Adventist, and he invented infant soy formula. He spent 10 years trying to get the American Medical Association to approve it. They had already approved different formulas, I think goat, milk, cow formula, for people who couldn't breastfeed. So there was already some infant formulas around, and I can't tell you who developed those because I haven't looked. But I know the soy formula, to get away from anything that was animal, came from Adventists. Harry Miller, he started in, I can't even tell you exactly what dates at the moment, but if you look up Harry Miller, you'll see that he invented the soy formula. And once the AMA approved it, then that allowed Nestle and everyone else to create those formulas too. Rice cereal, I believe, would have come all the way back to Lena Cooper and what she was slowly starting to teach to encourage people to reduce animal fats. Going into the American Diabetes Associations, I think Sean will agree with me that pre-insulin, low carb was the only way you could treat. And having animal fats and proteins were included in that. If you look at Joslin, he was low carbing before insulin came in. He was recommending low carb. Once insulin came in, then I think because it was a lot of hit and miss at the beginning as well, I wonder if they increased the carb intake to counteract, because they couldn't work out the insulin doses as well. So by keeping people at a higher thing, I wonder, I've heard little bits around that, so I wonder if that's where it came from. But certainly a guy called Leo P. Krall, Krall, he became the head of the International Diabetes Federation. He was an Adventist. His father had brought Adventism. He was from Czechoslovakia. He came to America and he started a big Czechoslovakian Adventist group there. Leo P. Kroll became part of the Joslin Clinic and became head of the International Diabetes Federation. So again, he would have been wanting to promote saturated fat and meat, I think, as bad. I can't tell you how many other people are involved, because this is their belief that medical evangelism is the way to save people. So it's not come from a place where they're trying to harm. They actually believe this is where we started. We started out in the Garden of Eden eating fruits, nuts, and seeds. And that was health. And when Eve took the fruit from the tree of life, the tree of life, then from the tree of knowledge, the tree of life was taken away. And my actual documentation that I took from the Seventh-day Adventist website, talking about vitamin B12 and suggesting that vitamin B12 is essential to our health, and it's only found in animal proteins and fats. But they believe that vitamin B12 may have been in the tree of life. So when we go back, we will have access to it only eating not eating any animal proteins and fats. But that's been taken down since I spoke about that and brought it up publicly. But it's a really interesting thought, and this is their belief, which is a lot harder to question than a financial belief, financial conflict of interest. So I think looking into it all, yes, they would have had influence on those things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anybody else? Otherwise, I'll jump in and ask another one of my own. Belinda, is there any idea to sort of, I mean, this is probably a hard question, but when we look at nutrition science, I look at the, there's an article, a position paper by the American Academy of Dietetics and Nutritionists, or Nutritionists and Dietetics. It's one that's always quoted by the vegans about, this being the safe for all ages and stages. And I look at the authors, and every single one of the authors, it was a 3-author paper, every single one of them is an ethical vegan or Seventh-day Adventist. And many of the reviewers of that study were also vegetarians, vegans, and Seventh-day Adventists. And so I just wonder, what is the level of penetrance in nutrition science in general relative to the general population? I mean, Seventh-day Adventists are not, and vegans and vegetarians are not a huge part of the population. My suspicion is they make a disproportionately high percentage of people in nutrition, particularly people in positions of authority in nutrition. Do you have any evidence one way or the other to confirm or deny that?
Well, my biggest evidence is that they're told that medical evangelism is the right arm of the church, and the health message is the entering wedge. So not only are doctors, dietitians, nurses, whomever else in the church advocating that message, but it's all the way through. It's total member involvement. So it's every single person in the church is required to promote health. But I think specifically, we've got a lot of people there's Joan Sabat. He's the only one on the 2020 US dietary guidelines. But if you look back, Nina and I have been having a look, he was influencing the dietary guideline committees with his studies and with referencing going back to previous dietary guideline committees, not just the one he's currently on. Mervyn Harding and Fred Stair, as I said, Mervyn Harding did the first study in 1948, started publishing papers in 1954, and the Harvard School of Public Health was founded on food industry funding. So Fred Stair's sitting in this position that's highly influenced by the food industry, which has a massive symbiotic relationship again with the Adventist message, because they have to process, they have to make foods for people to eat. So it works really, really well. I think a lot of the research is done that might say it has no conflict of interest, because there's no financial conflict of interest, so they don't have to say a personal bias at this point in time. You look at the Sunshine Act, they have to discuss in America. We don't have a Sunshine Act in Australia, so it's much harder to work out any industry funding of anything, whether it's pharma or food. But in America, you have a Sunshine Act. So I've been able to go in there and find out Kellogg's is very powerful as well. And it was founded by Seventh-day Adventists, and I still believe there are people, because William Keith, he was very philanthropic. He started giving him money away when he was still alive, which was very unusual back then. Mostly money was left in wills to people. He started a lot of philanthropic work, but a lot of it went to research as well. A lot of it went to providing breakfast to people. So Kellogg's breakfast cereals. I mean, it was a marketing thing as well, if you think about it, which is what Sanitarium definitely does in Australia as well. But I think there must be a high proportion of them, Sean, from what I can find, even if it's just 1 or 2 people on studies, and they would be influencing that group. But Joan Sabat specifically wrote an article called The Global Influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Diet. It was published in 2017. I've got it on my website, but all you need to do is Google it and you'll find it. It's been, I think it was published in a book, in a journal called Religion. But he says that nutrition science began with Seventh-day Adventist Church. But we know the Krebs cycle. You look at scientific things. If you look at the Krebs cycle and work out what our mitochondria need, the fuel that they need, animal proteins and fats are part of our biochemistry. If you look at what Seventh-day Adventist science say, they are doing science to prove divine inspiration, not disprove it. Harry Miller, who I spoke about before, who invented the soy infant formula, he set up a nutrition laboratory in America, and that was what it was set up to do. And the people who worked in that were Edward Risley, Mervyn Harding, who did the study with Fred Stair. There was key people in the American Dietetics Association at the time, UD Register. He actually spoke to the Senate inquiries on the health benefits of vegetarianism. So some really key people were involved in this nutritional laboratory that had its emphasis on proving, not disproving, divine inspiration, which was Ellen G. White's writings. Unknown to me, but I kept thinking my cognitive dissonance was going, Nathan Pritikin must be involved somehow in Seventh-day Adventism. Finally, I found one article where it was an interview with a woman, and she said when she went to Loma Linda, she was so excited to meet Nathan Pritikin as an adjunct professor at Loma Linda University. So and in this interview, she said that he'd read Ellen White's writings back in the 1940s and truly believed in them. I don't know if he actually was ever baptized, but he was working at the university and advocating it, and part of the McGovern report. He was really close friends with Senator McGovern. He did his eulogy. So looking at that, also Nick Motton, who was Senator McGovern's aide and wrote the dietary goals, the first dietary goals. He was said to be a Seventh-day Adventist. So we've got people who are in really key positions, whether they're actually the top or whether they're just influencing those people. I think some of the people I've discovered are Seventh-day Adventists are very, very high up in all sorts of organisations everywhere and influencing.
Belinda, was anybody asking if you've written a book, or do you plan on writing a book with all this stuff? Is that something you've...
I'm thinking of writing a book. I'm certainly getting a lot of information together. The problem is, Sean, I know so much. I find it hard to go, well, what does everyone else really want to know, and how do I simplify it into a book? That's why I keep writing my blogs, because then I can just write whatever I want. Nina Tyshos has asked me to start a new website, and here I am months later and I still haven't done anything about it. But she said it would be really good if I could start a website that was just science, because at the moment, because it's under the I Support Gary website, and it's definitely fighting, my husband was talking about this, why was he in trouble, and advocating for other guys, other people as well, who are being persecuted, I think, by the food and pharmaceutical and the ideology. Taking it away from more of a cottage garden industry website and making it a bit more medical and actually referencing things. So that would also be something that I would be keen to do and work on. But I think a book would be fascinating. So I would like to, yeah. Nina took 10 years to write hers, so it might take a while, but yeah, hopefully I'll get there. It's just incredible history.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to, please ask a question if you feel like it. Otherwise, I'll keep doing what I was doing, chat. But what is, I mean, you're in Australia, we're in the US. I mean, we see this sort of global effort. We had Eat Lancet come out about a year ago proposing their, dietary processed food diet to save the world, basically what it was. And are you seeing, is Australia, I mean, because I see a lot of stuff from Australia, and I don't know if it's just over the top. Is it just that we're getting selected? Is Australia going crazy, or is it just that we get selected bits of stuff from,
I think Australia's being very influenced. If you read the Eat Lancet, Australia is targeted to be one of the first countries in their global transformation planetary health diet. I think Australia is one of the targets because I think we're fairly susceptible to it all. I don't know. We've got a huge wheat, we've got a huge sugar industry. We've also got a very big dairy and beef industry. I mean, we are covering everything in Tasmania. In Tasmania, where I live, right at the very bottom of Australia, we have a beautiful, beautiful agricultural system based around animal proteins and fats. We have fantastic pastures here. We do not have any sugar, any wheat. So we could almost separate ourselves off. We should become a separate place. But in the mainland Australia, sugar and wheat are massive, and soy, legumes, all of those things, lots of fruit and veg, but the nut industry as well. They talk about animals using a lot of water. I can tell you, we've got cows down in the paddock below us that have not gone to appear to drink anything for so long. We've got grasses that are just naturally fed by rain. It's amazing. They don't have any water troughs down there for them. They don't have a dam. These cows aren't using masses of water. Nuts, on the other hand, which the Adventist studies, a lot of Adventist studies on the importance and health of nuts, because if they're not eating nuts, nut meats, they're not getting saturated fat. So they're doing a lot. Joan Sabat especially does a lot of studies funded by the Walnut Commission, the Almond Commission, whoever else. That nut industry uses so much water. In Australia, it's drying up our rivers. The Murray River Basin is just being decimated by the nut industry. So we have, but they're powerful, and Nuts for Life, the cereal industry, they are creating resources and educating our dietitians. And when I found those documents from the cereal industry, they paid the Dietitians Association of Australia to use their members to actively defend, protect, to influence, protect, and actively defend cereal grains and sugar. These dietitians believe their education. So the Dietitians Association of Australia, I don't know if it's the same in America, they've not come under the umbrella of the medical board, AHPRA, which covers the medical board and a lot of other allied health, physiotherapy, whole things. They deemed that dietetics was too low a risk to health to warrant putting the dietitians under this umbrella of health regulation. So the DA are in this beautiful position where they can accept funding from everybody because they are the accreditors, they provide all the continuing education, and they regulate their members. So you can't step outside that and not fear being in trouble. So this big push for a plant-based, which is really vegetarian, if not coming toward a vegan agenda, is big. Lifestyle medicine is becoming very popular. People are being brainwashed to think, meat's bad for the environment, meat's bad for our health. You hear this message often enough. People don't even challenge it, Sean. Gary can't even believe when he asks a doctor in the hallway, who goes, oh my gosh, cholesterol, but what about cholesterol? I go, what is cholesterol? And they cannot even answer him. They've just had it ingrained in them that high cholesterol is bad. So, when you consider this, lifestyle medicine group that are pushing it, Neil Barnard, thank you very much. We have a lot of it's come from America over to Australia. Doctors for Nutrition in Australia, another group that people go, Doctors for Nutrition, yay, finally we're talking about nutrition. And then you find out Scott Stoll in America, who's a devout Adventist with the Plantrition Project. He's he's the undercurrent of it. Neil Barnard comes to talk. It's another vegan propaganda group. And we're just walking into it. We think lifestyle medicine's so good. If you consider what Ellen was talking about, she had a very high anti-meat agenda, but she did talk about sleep. She did talk about stress. She did talk about other elements of health. And so New Start and the CHIP program are based on all these elements. So Georgia Ede has this great comment about the Eat Lancet, but I take it through to lifestyle medicine and the Seventh-day Adventist as well. It's a benevolent agenda. It seems good. So the anti-meat message must be good because all the other elements are good. We've got to stop smoking. We need to drink less. We need to have fresh air. We need to exercise. So it's a complicated thing. You get drawn into this group and it becomes like a church. It's like a religion because it is a religion. Lifestyle medicine is religion, and you get into it and then you believe everything because it all sounds very good.
Yeah, we see a lot of this guilt by association. It's like, they say a diet of, sugar and red meat. They always kind of include the two, like they come hand in hand, like you can't eat red
That's because it's come from Adventists.
Yeah,
Sugar
exactly.
and red meat.
Yeah,
In
so
fact,
it's
red
like,
meat is worse.
what about just one or the other, or not both? And it's kind of interesting there. All right. You guys, anybody have a question there, concerned about? Anybody? Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay.
Hi, Nancy.
So, hi. I just love listening to you, by the way. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. But I have a question, and it's a little off topic, having to do with osteopenia. And if I can ask a question about it, then fine. Otherwise, I'll let it go.
I had a nursing background, but it was over 20 years ago. I understand a bit about nutrition. You're probably better off asking Gary tomorrow.
Or you can ask me. I have a little knowledge as an orthopedic.
Or ask Sean.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Sorry, Sean, of course.
yeah.
I'm a nurse. I retired, and so I just got the diagnosis of osteopenia in my hip. And what I'm hearing, and I don't know if it's accurate, is that if I stick to a carnivore way of eating, that I'll begin to lay down more deposits, bone deposits, calcium, that kind of thing. Is that accurate information?
Well, I think the short answer is we don't really know because we don't have long-term data on carnivore diets. So, I'd say that'd be the first thing I would say. I would say the second thing is we do know that protein, and particularly animal protein, does seem to protect against osteoporosis and secondarily fragility fractures. So I think that is important. And beyond that, obviously, weight-bearing exercise resistance training. I think those are the best things that you can do. So it's got to be, load your bones, and there's good ways to do that. Actually, jumping is probably one of the most effective ways, but you may not be in a position to jump yet at this point. But and then protein. Bone is 50% protein. It's not a stick of chalk. It is a protein collagen skeleton on which minerals are deposited upon. And so you're not going to get there by supplementing calcium. You're not going to get there by supplementing vitamin D, quite honestly. The studies on those are not particularly compelling. I think that the things I mentioned, are going to be helpful for you. So that's how I would approach that. And I have seen some DEXA scans on people on carnivore diet which have gone favorably. They've actually shown that they've actually improved their scores. So I think it is, but it's a multi-year process. It takes you 25 years to grow your adult skeleton. So it's not something that you replace in a matter of weeks. Our calcium homeostasis, and calcium is one of the major minerals in bone, is a very tightly regulated, slow process. We don't have huge shifts in calcium. It's extremely rare to see someone with like a serum calcium deficiency or excess, outside of extreme circumstances. So it's very well regulated. So, we know that protein increases our gut absorption of calcium. The old thought was that high protein diets leach calcium from the bones because we saw calcium in the urine, but what's actually happening is when we have a high protein diet, we actually absorb more calcium from the gut. So it's kind of still in equilibrium. So
I will just say that Gary, because of his cancer, he went on to very high steroids for a long time, and his bone density was being leached. He was really showing quite advanced stages, and his bone density has improved going low carb, keto over the last few years. So, you know, just on his results, his bone density has improved.
Thank you.
So more protein, the better.
yeah, and probably, you know, coming off some of the meds doesn't hurt. You know, all those things that are there. Okay. Anybody else got something they want to share? Or
I just had a real quick question. Are y'all more of the higher protein keto or low, you know, keep it low in the meat area keto practitioners?
No. No, I'm working out where the plant-based dietary guidelines have come from, and I don't believe in them. In saying that, I'm not a carnivore. I like a few of them that say they're carnivore-ish. We certainly have a higher protein, animal fats. We're looking for a good quality source, grass-fed, pasture-fed proteins, and we can access those in Tasmania. We're very lucky. We've got beautiful markets, and we've got beautiful paddock to plate butchery where we can go, and so we're lucky here. I haven't quite given up all my veggies. I still like some veggies, and I still have a few nuts. So yeah, we classify ourselves more keto, but it's not that I don't appreciate that carnivore seems to be really helping some people incredibly and improving health. So I'm not challenging that. And I think some people, because if you look at some of the Seventh-day Adventists, they seem to do okay on a vegetarian diet that excludes all the shitty stuff that a lot of vegetarians might eat, highly processed up and goes, and you know, the sugary things. But in my research, I really found that even though the Seventh-day Adventist studies, which highly say, you know, vegetarians healthy, they're not eating fish or meat. They can classify themselves as vegetarian by eating meat less than once a week. So they're not. So I truly believe the healthiest ones are still eating animal proteins, and that's how they maintain their health with a vegetarian diet. But we know people on a vegetarian diet have to eat a lot. They've got to eat, you know, they're always hungry. I think the best thing about tending more towards a higher animal fats and proteins diet means you eat so much less as well. You're not snacking all day. I definitely intermittent fast. I do from dinner right through. I don't break my fast. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, but when you break your fast is up to you. It doesn't have to be cereal at 7 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, I intermittent fast, and that's what we would do, and usually eat 2 meals a day. Again, if we do a lot of exercise and we do a lot of stuff and we're hungry, we eat. We don't go, oh, no, you've got to not. But yeah, I think Sean's an amazing example, and I'm tempted to eat only animal proteins and fats so I could look like him.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I do exercise. I mean, I think I've never tried to say I haven't, but I think that, you know, I think that's what I think you'll find in this community, and particularly, at least the way I do it, I say, you know, ultimately we're going to find what works for us. And some people do need
health.
Carnivore.
Yeah.
And even if for a period of time, yeah. And then some of us find that we are carnivore-ish. And I'm certainly supportive of people that want to run that experiment and, you know, be honest about what happens. And some people it's fine. Some people, they just need to, or for whatever reason, choose to or want to stay on a more strict basis. And I think that's fine as well. But none of us are religious or, you know, about it. We don't have the first book of Rieger or the third book of Barnard to, you know, to quote like our counterparts, the vegans. I almost hate to compare them directly, but we often get compared that way. What do you do? Because you guys, I know Gary, what was the deal? Because you guys had a nutrition, you know, outside of Gary's practice, you were running a kind of a nutrition center, lifestyle center of your own, and that kind of, what was the problem? You couldn't continue to do that, or what are you doing these days to fill out your time?
Oh, I'm still busy researching. There's never, it's amazing how much there still is to uncover and to discover. We opened Nutrition for Life. Gary was about to have his hip replaced. So he was, I think, May 2014, about to have his hip replaced, and got the notification from AHPRA that he'd been notified. And from that day, he was not allowed to talk about nutrition anymore, or they were going to investigate to see if this was going to go forward. But it was likely that during this investigation, he was not allowed to talk about nutrition. He had to come off social media. A whole lot of restrictions were put onto him. And he just said, oh my gosh, well, I've got 4 weeks off to recover from my hip replacement. If I can't talk about nutrition to my patients, I'm not sending them to any dietitian or anyone. Just coincidentally, a dietitian had approached him maybe 3 days before to say, could you mentor me to promote low carb, because I'm really keen to run my patients with diabetes in the low carb principles. So he contacted her and said, I've got 4 weeks. Do you want to start a business? So that's what he did. He spent his 4 weeks recovering from his hip replacement, designing up resources, creating everything. We had space already, luckily, so we transformed that into Nutrition for Life. And we had one dietitian, a nutritionist, and that was at the start. And it grew over 2.5 years to have 9 staff. We had 3 accredited practicing dietitians, we had 2 nutritionists, we had a diabetes educator, we had a health coach. And what was so amazing about it was support, accountability, and motivation. We would take people where they were at and help them, get to where their health was improving, that they were starting to see why their blood glucose was out of control. We were teaching people. It wasn't just come in, this is what you've got to do, here's your sad guidelines, eat mostly whole grains and whatever else. We ran cooking classes. We did all of the things that the Adventists do. I looked at their models and thought, these people are very clever. So what can we do to support people? But they're seeing what their blood glucose does. They're seeing improvements in their health. And part of the AHPRA investigation, they started throwing out this thing that Gary was referring people to a business that he owned and making money from it. Well, I can assure you, $700,000 down in Australian money, we didn't make any money from that business. We were doing it as a community support group. We truly believed in it. We were truly invested, and we all hoped one day that it would not be losing money. But you've got to pay people, and they're sick, and then they have babies, and whatever else happens, it's much more complicated running a business than we had first thought. So we spoke to the team about it, and one of the girls who had been involved from the very beginning bought out our Nutrition for Life for $1. We sold it to her for $1. So legally it was a sale. They have kept running. It's a smaller but really efficient group. It means Gary's still got dietitians that he can refer to who are supportive of low carb principles. And so for him, that's awesome. One of our other nutritionists has set up her own practice and is also fantastic. So I know, probably like Gary, Sean, you would have a physio who is specific in this area that you go, yeah, I'm sending my patients here to that physio. But there's other physios that have areas of expertise. So Gary now has a couple of dietitians that he can send people to, and also a diabetes educator. And so these people in our community and are still growing. We also were copping a lot of flack from the public hospital where Gary was working. The diabetes department and certainly the dietitians department were collaborating, I'm sure, because they were telling everybody in the public who would go to that public care area that low carb would kill them, and don't go to Gary's centre. So also I think taking our name away from it helped Nutrition for Life to become a sustainable business, which is good. we wanted that.
Belinda, thank you so much. Unfortunately, it's right at 4 o'clock, and I've got Paul Mason or 3 o'clock. Paul.
Yeah.